Good evening. Wow. Good evening. That's more like it. Thank you so much for joining us for this community gathering. We are so glad you're here. As the Interfaith Mission Service continues to celebrate its 45th year, we welcome each of you here tonight to participate. Participate in the Interfaith Mission Service and to hear our keynote speaker, Mr. Brian Stevenson. Mr. Stevenson's book will be on sale again after his speech, and there will be time for you to get your book signed by him at the conclusion of the event. I'd now like to introduce Reverend Miriam Smith, our Minister of Outreach here at Trinity United Methodist Church, our host for tonight's gathering and the Exploring Faith Intersections Conference tomorrow. If you aren't registered to attend the conference tomorrow, there will be a table in the new room lobby, and you can do so tonight or tomorrow morning. Reverend Miriam.
Thank you. It is wonderful to see all of you here tonight and to be a part of this event. I am greatly encouraged to see so many faces and so many different traditions represented here. I hope that you will find this time, this evening, and also tomorrow's events, a moment of encouragement in your daily lives. I ask that we could bear one another in compassion, and also carry what we learn here through the rest of our lives out into the world beyond this time together. So thank you again for being here, and welcome to Trinity United Methodist Church. We are so glad that you're here.
Good afternoon. I'm glad she got some practice with you. I'm Robert Farrell, and I'm here to help guide through this service and make a joyous occasion for you. Today's worship service was organized by several caring people with hopes of a meaningful experience for each and every one of you caring people. Let us enter into worship with an open heart full of love. Our shared humanity is expressed by jointly accepting our responsibility to heal, repair, and transform the world. We are citizens of a compassionate city, gathering together to commune in unity. Together, we call this our community, where we care for each other, where we share compassion together.
During our brief time together, let's not talk about our differences. I don't want to tell you that my religion is better than your religion. I want to share our experience of God. I don't want you to tell me that your religion is the only way. I want you to tell me how God makes a difference in your life. Let's not discuss theologies and liturgies and creeds, but how we feel God's presence in the loneliness of our soul's dark night. Let's not repent and atone and do penance and make our knees sore. Instead, let us share our deepest fear and our deepest joy and know we are the same.
How does it feel to be abandoned, broken, worthless? How does it feel when it's your child trapped in the wreckage, or when loss and injustice take us by surprise? And is life so transient, so meaningless? Are we not more than this? We walk in Buddha's sacred steps, we follow Christ's holy feet, we dance to Krishna's flute and make the prophet's pilgrimage. So many beautiful paths to the mountain's peak. But did you notice that last night the setting sun lit up the raindrops and the tips of the trees like crimson fairy lights? That a tiny black and white bug is delicately walking across the floor? That the scent of one stem of freesia flowers is permeating the entire room? That the elderly sheep in the field opposite mistakes herself for a lamb in the spring and frolics absurdly, delightfully?
So, for a while, let us not compare our sacred text. Instead, let us be still and feel the touch of Buddha's hand on earth. Let us be quiet and hear the tender heart of Christ beating in our chests. Let us dance the sacred dance with reverence and mindfully sense the way of things. Let us lovingly call each other to prayer and joyfully thank the Great Spirit which permeates all things and forever calls us to notice our divinity in the midst of humanity. Let us be aware that our deepest human sufferings and our greatest human joys, when acknowledged as ours, teaches us to let go of our judgments, celebrate our diversity, nurture our unity, and sets us at a threshold, the open doorway to the peace of God which passes all understanding.
You are about to hear a devotional song, a Hindu devotional song, popularly known as a bhajan. This one is special because it was one of the favorites of Mahatma Gandhi, and he included it in his daily prayers. The reason I chose it for today is it contains a phrase which says, Ishwar and Allah are names of the same God. I think it reflects today's spirit. Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sitaram
Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sitaram
Sitaram Sitaram Bhaj Pyare Tu Sitaram
Sitaram Sitaram Bhaj Pyare Tu Sitaram
Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sitaram
Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sitaram
ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरे नाम सबको सन्मति दे भगवान
ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरे नाम सबको सन्मति दे भगवान
रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम
रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम
जय रघुनंदन जय सिया राम जानकी वल्लभ सीताराम
जय रघुनंदन जय सिया राम जानकी वल्लभ सीताराम
रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम
रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम
रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम
Let us hear this prayer from the Rig Veda. O God, let us be united. Let us speak in harmony. Let our minds apprehend alike. Common be our prayer. Common be the end of our assembly. Common be our resolution. Common be our deliberations. Alike be our feelings. Unified be our hearts. Common be our intentions. Perfect be our unity. So be it. Compassion. Compassion calls for us to recognize each other's humanity. Compassion calls for us to dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there. Compassion calls for us to act in justice for all. Compassion is called forth by the Golden Rule, which can be found in all the major traditions of our time. The Golden Rule is the principle of compassion, justice, and just relationships. Let us hear and respond to the Golden Rule as stated from the different faith traditions. As each of 8 faith traditions come forward to share the Golden Rule, if you'll turn in your bulletin, please respond with the words as they appear, and we will let sound help your compassion resonate into the world.
The Baha'i Faith states the Golden Rule as, lay not on any soul a load that you would not wish to be laid upon you, and desire not for anyone the things you would not desire for yourself. That's from the Baha'u'llah's The Gleanings.
May
your
our hearts
be filled with compassion and a thirst for justice that ends human trafficking.
This is the sum of duty. Do not do to others what would cause pain if done to you. May our hearts be filled with compassion, therefore justice that adds priority.
The Buddhist tradition states the Golden Rule as, treat not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful.
May our hearts be filled with compassion and a thirst for justice that ends
The Sikh tradition states the Golden Rule as, I am a stranger to no one, and no one is a stranger to me. Indeed, I am a friend to all. From Guru Granth Sahib. May our hearts be filled with compassion and a thirst for justice that ends addiction.
Christianity states the Golden Rule as, in everything do to others as you would have them do to you, for this is the law and the prophet. May our hearts be filled with compassion and a thirst for justice that ends isolation of the elderly.
Native spirituality states the Golden Rule, as we are as much alive as we keep the earth alive. May our hearts be filled with compassion and a thirst for justice that ends terrorism.
Judaism states the Golden Rule as, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. This is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. May our hearts be filled with compassion and a thirst for justice that ends domestic abuse.
Islam states the golden rule as not one of you truly believes until you wish for others what you wish for yourself. May our hearts be filled with compassion and a thirst for justice that creates peace.
On July 28, 2014, Secretary of State John Kerry announced President Obama's nomination of Rabbi Saperstein to serve as the Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. Rabbi Saperstein is currently awaiting confirmation by the Senate, and I'm sure with the upcoming midterms in just a day that it'll pass by flying colors, or at least we hope so. Though looking at the Senate, I don't hold my breath. Selected by Newsweek in 2009 as the most influential rabbi in the country and described in the Washington Post profile as the quintessential religious lobbyist on Capitol Hill, Rabbi David Saperstein represents the Reform Jewish movement to Congress and the administration as the director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. During his over 3-decade tenure at the helm of the RAC, Rabbi Saperstein has headed several national religious coalitions, including the Coalition to Protect Religious Liberty. He has served on the board of numerous national organizations, including the NAACP, People for the American Way, National Religious Partnership on the Environment, and the World Bank World Faith Development Dialogue. In 1999, Rabbi Saperstein was elected as the first chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, created by a unanimous vote of Congress, and in 2009, he was appointed by President Obama as a member of the first White House Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. In 2004 and 2006, the Wall Street Journal and the Religious News Service respectively described him as among the country's most influential shapers of religious issues on national elections. He is also an attorney and teaches seminars on First Amendment church-state law and in Jewish law at Georgetown University Law School. He is a prolific writer, and he is married to Ellen Weiss, an award-winning journalist, and they have 2 children together. We are honored to have Rabbi Saperstein share with us some thoughts on the Golden Rule, among other things, and look forward to his many kind words this evening.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Rabbi Bahar. It's wonderful to be back in Huntsville. I had the opportunity to meet a number of people who are gathered here tonight when I visited about 7 years ago and did a series of lectures to the interfaith community. I wasn't quite sure we could make this work, but when Debbie Esslinger and my dear friend Ann Lois Ballin kind of gang up on you and told me Brian Stevenson and Jim Wallace and lots of other good folks who were going to be here, I jumped at the opportunity. I'm really honored and pleased to be back here, and particularly so with the Interfaith Mission Service. I thank you all, not just for this conference, but for the extraordinary work that you do on an ongoing basis to make this community a better community for all. You model the idea of faith communities working together, recognizing none of us can do it alone. But you and I together, to quote from the Jewish tradition, you and I together, we can change the world. And that's what you represent. So I am delighted and honored to be here at this extraordinary time. And I particularly want to honor you for the work that you've done in the core efforts to make social justice a reality for this community, a reality in the greater world. And I set my comments about the Golden Rule in community in the context of applying it to the great social justice challenges that we face. Why is social justice so central to our common endeavors? Well, Let's try this answer. Because God says so. Is it not self-evident that we cannot fulfill a destiny to be a light to the nations? We cannot respond to God's central call to us, understood in all of our traditions, that we should be partners with God in creating a world of justice and peace for all, if we retreat from struggles for justice, peace, and equality in our nation and in our world? In Leviticus, you shall be holy, for the eternal your God is holy, we are commanded. And how does God tell us? Can we strive to be like God? Can we manifest that holiness? By feeding the hungry, by creating courts of justice, by paying the laborer a fair and timely wage, by creating a marketplace that is fair and honest, or in Isaiah, to tear apart the chains of the oppressed, to deal our bread to the hungry, to bring the homeless into our homes. The Bible is clear. The Bible is clear. If we are to see God in every other human being, it requires us to make justice real in the world. And I would add this, that we cannot respond to this call without speaking truth to power. If Abraham, history's first known lobbyist, were willing to bargain, cajole, advocate with God on behalf of the innocents in Sodom, can we do less with human rulers where we see injustice flourish and suffering multiply? Or as the American prophet Frederick Douglass observed, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed on them. Or to paraphrase the great Orthodox Jewish scholar Isidore Tversky, one cannot claim to be a God-intoxicated human being without having an unquenchable thirst for social justice. And we know what is required to bring justice into the world. It requires a two-pronged approach. First, it requires changing policies and structures to eviscerate inequity and enhance justice and peace. True peace, shalom, salam. Not pax or pace, the absence of strife, but lishalem, to make whole, to heal this broken world. But it requires as well changing people. No matter what the policies are, if we do not change people, we will not succeed in bringing justice into the world. And that begins inescapably with inculcating empathy and compassion. And that, in turn, according to a vast array of the world's religious traditions, is rooted in their understanding of what we call the Golden Rule. To treat others as we would be treated, to refrain from hurting others in ways that we know would hurt us. There are many efforts, the Golden Rule Project, the Tannenbaum Center, a myriad of organizations that you can go online and find in 60, 70 religious traditions how the Golden Rule is formulated, as we so powerfully heard from the diverse religions represented in this community. I'm going to frame this in the work that I was honored to do for 2 years, working with Karen Armstrong in the development and publication of the Charter of Compassion and the work in trying to create a worldwide community that was a compassionate community. We're going to close this service with the words of that Charter of Compassion. And when we do, listen and think about how you would apply those values, those human insights, those societal mandates to creating a better world. We need the insights that religion brings to give depth and insight to such efforts to create a better world and prevent them from becoming superficial or just pragmatic.
The faith traditions have explored for centuries the spiritual, the psychological implications of the compassionate life. They know that compassion, what is at stake in the Golden Rule, is the work of a lifetime. It cannot be achieved overnight. It isn't achieved in a single act, no matter how wondrous that single act must be. It is achieved in the way we change ourselves and we change the burdens and challenges that our brothers and sisters everywhere face. It is difficult to live according to the Golden Rule. It requires a constant, imaginative, and intelligent restraint, as well as positive action, so that we do not simply impose our will on others. We may think we know what is best for them, but we must do it in a way that empowers others to be a partner with us in the work that we do. And the me-first ethos, in which self-gratification is regarded as a natural right and the principal goal of society, has to give way to the historic insights of our tradition. This goes back a long way. Our word compassion is often confused with pity, associated with an uncritical, sentimental benevolence, softness, or even weakness, Karen likes to point out. But in fact, it derives from the Latin patire, meaning to suffer, undergo, or experience. Compassion, to endure something with another person, to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, to feel her pain or his pain as though it were our own, to enter gratuitously into another's point of view. This is what is called for if we are to make the Golden Rule work. And in the Semitic languages, racham in Arabic, derives from the word that means womb, which evokes a maternal affection that is our first experience of unselfish, unconditional altruism. That image of the mother and the child is an archetypal expression of human love, which involves affective emotion, but also requires dedicated, unselfish action at all times. This is a powerful theme that we have brought to the world. How then do we apply it to many of the challenges that we face? Well, let me give a few examples. Men and women. If we really would treat others as we would be treated, how can men stand by with pay inequity? How do you reconcile that? With abuse of women, with rape. How do we reconcile that with these core values? Or take the issue of education. Across the world, there remain millions of young girls who lack access to primary education. Who knows the Anne Franks in their midst who are stifled in fulfilling their potential. All of us want our children to fulfill their potential. Can we settle for anything less for every child across the globe? But worldwide, almost 2/3 of illiterate adults are women. In sub-Saharan Africa, only 23% of girls in rural areas were completing primary education in 2011. And these dismal stats are, of course, at odds with their impact. The yields from investing in girls' education are simply enormous. An educated girl is likely to increase her personal or earning potential, as well as reduce poverty in her community. The effects carry from one generation to the next. Educated girls have fewer, healthier, better educated children. This past April, the world witnessed with horror the extremist Muslim group Boko Haram kidnapped more than 250 mostly Christian girls from their high school dormitory. An act that was repeated just recently, but it no longer made the global news in the same way. And so too, Malala Yousafzai was shot by extremists in Pakistan simply for championing the right of girls to education. These attacks are part of a global backlash against girls' education by extremists. Why are fanatics so afraid of girls' education? As Nicholas Kristof puts it, because there's no force more powerful to transform a society. The greatest threat to extremism isn't drones firing missiles, but girls reading books. How we treat someone, giving them what we would want for ourselves and our own, is inexorably bound up with changing the world. Or consider that there is not any parent in the world, in America, who wants their child hungry, unable to have access to food. Yet there are so many in this country who do not have the luxury of being able to choose what they will or will not choose to eat. 46 million Americans live in poverty. 47 million receive SNAP benefits. According to 2013 data, over 49 million Americans lived in a household that faced difficulty meeting their nutritional needs. 15.5 million children struggled with food insecurities. 50% of U.S. children will receive SNAP at some point in their lives before they're 20 years old. And the majority don't say on it. This is a program that actually works, helps families during times of trouble, and offset with what we do in the religious community in providing food banks and access to nutrition to others who wouldn't have it. It is a tremendous effort that we are accomplishing to treat others like ourselves. And yet, it requires the country as a whole to do this. 31 million children every year receive free or reduced school lunch programs, but during the summer, it's only 3 million. 1 out of 10. 9 out of 10 who rely on getting their midday meal in the schools simply don't have access to it. How do we do that? Many in the religious community work together with a bipartisan piece of legislation, the Summer Meals Act of 2014, which would expand, strengthen, and protect access to summer nutrition programs. Hasn't passed yet, but with bipartisan support, we can get it through in this lame duck session. And so, too, the challenges of racial divides and mistrust that afflict communities across the U.S. They are a tragic emblem of how much work remains to be done to overcome the divisions rooted in our country's history and the persistence of racial and ethnic divides. This is particularly true, as we will hear later when Brian Stevenson talks, in the criminal justice system. There is a perception that we have two criminal justice systems, separate and unequal. One for affluent whites who can afford good lawyers, and one for racial minorities and for the poor. Foremost among the complaints are the disparate application of the death penalty, police brutality, racial profiling, sentencing disparity, disparate treatment of minorities in the juvenile justice system. This pipeline from schools to prisons for the African American community is one of the most embarrassing characteristics of contemporary American life. While making up 13% of America's overall population, African Americans comprise 38% of our country's prison and jail population. African American men face prison sentences nearly 28% longer than those of white men who committed similar crimes. 40% of those on death row are African American, so often because they just don't have access to legal representation. And every one of these problems is harder to solve because of the breakdown of bipartisan support for civil rights legislation. There was never a civil rights bill in the history of this country that was passed by a partisan vote. One of the great achievements was a bipartisan vote. And when Congress or the state legislators failed to act, we could turn to the Supreme Court. But that idea of looking into a population here and seeing the common humanity with us that entitles them to the same basic rights is being lost. It's particularly true at this time when we see the constitutional right to vote. That is the way we fix these problems. being limited and restricted disproportionately, again, for minorities. And one other thing in this area, the growing problem of hate crimes. Think about it. Hate crimes aimed at a person because of who they are, how can that be reconciled with the golden rule? When Danny Lee Overstreet was killed when a man frustrated by jokes made about his last name opened fire in a gay bar in Roanoke, killing because he wanted by his own admission to get rid of the faggots, he did more than murder a compassionate, quiet, optimistic man. And those who murdered Matthew Shepard did far more than end the life of a beautiful, promising, lovely young man, loving young man. Those who brutally dragged James Byrd to death did far more than end the life of a decent, hardworking, loving father and grandfather. The man who opened fire at the Sikh temple in Wisconsin did more than wound 4 human beings and end the lives of 6 of God's children simply because of their religious or ethnic identity. These perpetrators violated the very concept of the golden rule and the very principles of American society. For hate crimes are more than acts of mere violence. They are more than murders, beatings, and assault. Hate crimes are nothing less than attacks on those values that are the pillars of our republic and the guarantors of our freedom. They are a violation of the golden rule and a betrayal of the promise of America. They erode our national well-being, and those who commit those crimes do so fully intending to tear at the too often frayed threads of diversity that binds us together and makes us strong. They seek to divide and conquer. They seek to tear us apart from within, pitting American against American, fomenting violence and civil discord. I'm proud that the Department of Justice a year ago expanded the number of protected minority communities under hate crime legislation. But together, the religious communities have to lead the way in acting more forcefully than ever to mobilize our historic coalition of decency to ensure that such hate crimes and prejudice cease. And here you've modeled respect for religious groups. Like most Jews, I know all too well that over the centuries, the Jewish people have been the quintessential victims of religious persecution, ethnic cleansing, and demonization. We've learned all too painfully the terrible cost to the universal rights, security, and well-being of religious communities when good people remain silent in the face of religious oppression. Oppression justified by rejecting the notion we should treat others the way we treat ourselves and our own. This is just one key reason why we cannot remain silent today when we see historic Christian, Yazidi, other communities in Iraq and Syria being devastated. Some of the oldest Christian communities on the face of the earth. When we see Baha'is in Iran, Tibetan Buddhists in China, Shia Muslims in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Bahrain, Rohingya Muslims in Burma, all victims of governmental and societal discrimination, harassment, persecution, or physical attacks. Even in Western Europe, we are witnessing growing anti-Muslim rhetoric and hate crimes, and an alarming resurgence in anti-Semitic discourse and violence against Jewish communities. The first mob attacks on synagogues since the 1930s. Shootings at Jewish schools, firebombs at synagogues, attacks on Jews in the streets, rhetoric from the resurgent right wing and from some of the immigrant communities denouncing Jews. Calls openly heard for the extermination of Jews again. Messages that we thought we would never hear again in our lifetimes. And the time to act is now, not when it gets worse. Government, civil society, religious leaders in every country across the globe must be more assertive, more vigilant, more effective in marginalizing and delegitimizing hate rhetoric and acts of hate. To the religiously oppressed in every land who live in fear, afraid to speak of what they believe in, who worship in underground churches, mosques, or temples, lest authorities discover and punish their devotion to an authority beyond the state, who languish in prisons, bodies broken, spirits too often disfigured, simply because they love God in their own way or question the existence of God, who feel so desperate that they flee their homes to avoid being killed and persecuted because of their faith. For all of them, our focus on the Golden Rule calls for us to be a beacon of hope and light. It's an enormous agenda to apply the Golden Rule to the world about us. I've only scratched the surface. Every one of you could speak eloquently about other challenges as well. Listen, we live in an extraordinary moment. You know, every generation thinks the problems that they have are more perilous and dangerous than any others. The only difference between all the generations before us and now is we're right and they were wrong. And what makes it different is technology. We've always had problems of warfare, pollution, threats to our freedom, how to ethically apply new inventions, but not when matched with the kind of technology that can change everything, blow up the world in a nuclear holocaust, change the entire climate of the globe, make Big Brother a reality, use genetic engineering to either cure birth defects or create Hitler's master race. In every one of these areas and so many others, we face perilous problems. In the lifetime of some in this room, we have smashed the atom, cracked the genetic code, and pierced the veil of outer space itself. In a world in which you can do everything, what you should do, the moral question, is the fundamental challenge facing humanity. And on that issue, religious community is urgent, profound, and indispensable guidance to offer. We have changed the world in the past, making it a far better, more ethical, more compassionate world. And our voices are never been needed more than they are today. Yet as daunting as these challenges facing us are, we live at a time of hope, of which our ancestors, our prophets, our sages throughout the ages could only have dreamed, praying that one day there would come such a time as this. We are the first generation that produces enough food to feed every human being on earth. That's truly the golden rule. A failure to do it now is a failure of moral vision and political will. We're the first generation that can conquer malaria and an array of diseases that have plagued humanity from time immemorial. The failure to do it is a failure of moral vision and political will. The first generation that can educate every child on earth, can undo damage to the environment, that can assure freedom across the globe. In all these, our failure to do it now is a failure of moral vision and political will. And we know what we must do to succeed, to enhance the spiritual fulfillment that can transform people, to make the golden rule real, to empower communities to organize to meet their needs, to change government policy. All of these must be part of the solution. And what I've learned so clearly in my 40 years of religious and moral advocacy to governments and society is that on all these issues and more, somebody will decide. And our only choice is whether we will be the audience watching others make those decisions, or we will help be the authors of those decisions. If we remain silent, this I promise you, that the vacuum of our silence will be filled by voices that do not share our values, our dreams, our aspirations, voices not of charity and justice, but selfishness and greed, voices not of love, but of hatred, voices not of respect and tolerance, but of secular and religious extremism. The bottom line is this: it's the first generation in all of human history that does not have the luxury to make the same mistakes as those generations before and learn from them. It is as though all of human history was a dry run for this moment, and this time it counts. And at such a time of this, the religious community's voice, at once distinctive and unified, needs to be heard. And the principle of the golden rule must flourish if we are to succeed. We must lift up the common themes that unite us, of compassion, of justice, of sensing in the other, each and every other, God's presence, and of cherishing the mandates to treat others as we would want ourselves to be treated. Dr. King, in his remarkable Riverside speech in Vietnam, said, "We are now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilizations are written the most pathetic words, too late." This is a sense of urgency that must animate this timely conference. Never before has our world needed to hear more clearly the values of human dignity, charity, social justice, compassion, and peace that is common to our multivaried traditions and faiths more than today. Never before has the potential for our cooperative enterprise that you exemplify day in and day out been more compelling than it is today. So out of this conference, let one theme resound: humanity is not the prisoner of a bitter and unremitting past, but rather together we can be the shapers of a better and more hopeful future for all God's children. We can be, we must be, we will be. That is our role. Go forward with confidence together, proclaimers of a world of peace, bearers of flames of justice, weavers of dreams for all God's children. And let us never cease until we make real the world our children so richly deserve, a world in which the golden rule is the rule for all humanity. May that be the blessing of this gathering. May that be the blessing of your lives.
Thank you. Let us pray with this Baha'i prayer. It is the estimation of God, all people are equal. There is no distinction or preference for any soul in the realm of his justice and equity. God did not make these divisions. They have their origin in humankind. Therefore, as they are against the plan and purpose of God, they are false and imaginary. This variety in forms and coloring, manifest in all kingdoms, is in accordance to creative wisdom and divine purpose. The diversity in the human family should be cause of love and harmony, as it is in music, where the different notes blend together in making a perfect chord. Abdul Baha. Thank you.
Please join us in Lean on Me. Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow, but if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Please swallow your pride if I have things you need to borrow, for no one can fill those of your needs that you won't let show. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Just call on me, brother, when you need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. I just might have a problem that you understand. We all need somebody to lean on. If there is a load you have to bear that you can't carry, I'm right up the road. I'll share your load if you just call me. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Call me, come
On February 28, 2008, acclaimed scholar and best-selling author Karen Armstrong received the TED Prize and made a wish to help create, launch, and propagate a charter for compassion. After much work and contributions of thousands of people, the charter was unveiled to the world on November 12, 2009. In the spring of 2010, the Compassionate Action Network became an organizing hub for a global compassion movement and succeeded in having the city of Seattle sign the Charter for Compassion, and then initiated a Compassionate Cities campaign to spread the movement to cities everywhere, including the city of Huntsville. The Golden Rule binds together our diverse population in a commitment contained in the Charter for Compassion. A diverse group of youth has joined us this afternoon to share with you the Charter for Compassion.
The principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions, calling us always to treat others as we wish to be treated ourselves. Compassion compels us to work tirelessly to elevate the suffering of our fellow creatures.
To dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and to put another there, and to honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being, treating everybody without exception with absolute justice, equity, and respect.
It is also necessary in both public and private life to refrain consistently and empathetically from inflicting pain. To act or speak violently out of spite, chauvinism, or self-interest, to impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody, and to incite hatred by denigrating others.
Even our enemies is a denial of our common humanity. We acknowledge that we have failed to live compassionately, and that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion.
We therefore call upon all men and women to restore compassion to the center of morality and religion, to return to the ancient principle that any interpretation of Scripture that breeds violence, hatred, or disdain is illegitimate.
To ensure that youth are given accurate and respectful information about other traditions, religions, and cultures. To encourage a positive appreciation of culture and religious diversity. To cultivate an informed empathy with the suffering of all human beings, even those regarded as enemies.
We urgently need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world, rooted in a principled determination to transcend selfishness. Compassion can break down political, dogmatic, ideological, and religious boundaries. Born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential to human relationships and to a fulfilled humanity. It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable to the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community.
We came here today to be together, compassionate, and commit to just actions. In chapter 67 of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu wrote, quote, "I have just 3 things to teach: simplicity, patience, compassion. These 3 are your greatest treasures. Simple in actions and in thoughts, you return to the source of being. Patient with both friends and enemies, you accord with the way things are. Compassionate toward yourself, you reconcile all beings in the world." End quote. As we close this service today, may we all believe that we are compassion and that our compassion makes a difference in the world. Thank you all for being here. May peace fill your life so that love will overflow. May the long-time sun shine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on. Thank you.
Lovely service, really was.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.